Hello folks, Dan here. Today I will be reading again from the Collier Junior Classics 1955 edition, Volume 4, Hero Tales, and I will continue reading Finn and Oisin from Celtic legend. So let's go back to the Emerald Isle in the early 9th century and revisit the Fenian cycle, that fascinating period in Irish mythology. We last left Finn McCool, having found a lone boy with no father or mother, but who was protected by a kindly deer in a hidden valley. This deer was in fact Finn's beloved wife, Saba, who was ensorcelled by a vile enchanter who had deceived her by taking Finn's form. Finn took in this boy and named him Oisin. And now, Finn and Oisin, Part 4, Oisin in the Land of Youth. It happened that, on a misty summer morning, as Finn and Oisin, with many companions, were hunting on the shores of Loch Lena, they saw coming toward them a maiden, beautiful exceedingly, riding on a snow-white steed. She wore the garb of a queen. A crown of gold was on her head, and a dark brown mantle of silk, set with stars of red gold, fell around her and trailed on the ground. Silver shoes were on her horse's hooves, and a crest of gold nodded on its head. When she came near, she said to Finn, "From very far away I have come, and now at last I have found thee, Finn, son of Cool." Then Finn said, "What is thy land and race, maiden, and what dost thou seek from me?" "My name," she said, "is Niamh of the Golden Hair. I am the daughter of the king of the Land of Youth, and that which has brought me here is the love of thy son Oisin." Then she turned to Oisin and spoke to him in the voice of one who has never asked anything, but it was granted to her. "Wilt thou go with me, Oisin, to my father's land?" And Oisin said, "That will I, and to the world's end." For the fairy spell had so wrought upon his heart that he cared no more for any earthly thing but to have the love of Niamh of the head of gold. Then the maiden spoke of the land over sea, to which she had summoned her lover. And as she spoke, a dreamy stillness fell on all things, nor did a horse shake his bit, nor a hound bay, nor the least breath of wind stir in the forest trees, till she had made an end. And what she said seemed sweeter and more wonderful as she spoke it, than anything they could afterwards remember to have heard. But so far as they could remember it, it was this: "Delightful is the land beyond all dreams, fairer than aught thine eyes have ever seen. There all the year the fruit is on the tree, and all the year the bloom is on the flower. There with wild honey drip the forest trees, the stores of wine and mead shall never fail. Nor pain nor sickness knows the dweller there, death and decay come near him nevermore. The feast shall cloy not, nor the chase shall tire, nor music cease forever through the hall. The golden jewels of the Land of Youth outshine all splendors ever dreamed by man. Thou shalt have horses of the fairy breed, thou shalt have hounds that can outrun the wind, 100 chiefs shall follow thee in war, 100 maidens sing thee to thy sleep. A crown of sovereignty thy brow shall wear, and by thy side a magic blade shall hang. Thou shalt be lord of all the Land of Youth, and lord of Niamh, of the head of gold." As the magic song ended, the Fians beheld Oisin mount the fairy steed and hold the maiden in his arms, and ere they could stir or speak, she turned her horse's head and shook the ringing bridle, and down the forest glade they fled, as a beam of light flies over the land when clouds drive across the sun, and never did the Fianna behold Oisin, son of Finn, on earth again. Yet what befell him afterwards is known. As his birth was strange, so was his end, for he saw the wonders of the Land of Youth with mortal eyes, and lived to tell them with mortal lips. When the white horse with its riders reached the sea, it ran lightly over the waves, and soon the green woods and headlands of Erin faded out of sight. And now the sun shone fiercely down, and and the riders passed into a golden haze in which Oisin lost all knowledge of where he was or if sea or dry land were beneath his horse's hooves. But strange sights sometimes appeared to them in the mist, for towers and palace gateways loomed up and disappeared, and once a hornless doe bounded by them, and chased by a white hound with one red ear, and again they saw a young maid ride by on a brown steed, bearing a golden apple in her hand, and close behind her followed a young horseman on a white steed, a purple cloak floating at his back, and a gold-hilted sword in his hand. And Oisin would have asked the princess who and what these apparitions were, but Niam bade him ask nothing, nor seem to notice any phantom they might see until they were come to the land of youth. At last, the sky loomed above them, and Niam urged their steed faster. The wind lashed them with pelting rain, thunder roared across the sea, and lightning blazed. But they held on their way until at length they came once more into a region of calm and sunshine. And now, Oisin saw before him a shore of yellow sand, lapped by the ripples of a summer sea. Inland, there rose before his eye wooded hills, amid which he could discern the roofs and towers of a noble city. The white horse bore them swiftly to the shore, and Oisin and the maiden lighted down. And Oisin marveled at everything around him, for never was water so blue or trees so stately as those he saw, and the forest was alive with the hum of bees and the song of birds. And the creatures that are wild in other lands, the deer and the red squirrel and the wood dove, came, without fear, to be caressed. Soon, as they went forward, the walls of a city came in sight, and folk began to meet them on the road, some riding, some afoot, all of whom were either youths or maidens, all looking as joyous as if the morning of happy life had just begun for them, and no old or feeble person was to be seen. Niam led her companion through a towered gateway built of white and red marble, and there they were met by a glittering company of 100 riders on black steeds, and 100 on white, and Oisin mounted a black horse, and Niam her white, and they rode up to a stately palace where the king of the land of youth had his dwelling. And there he received them, saying in a loud voice that all the folk could hear, "Welcome, Oisin, son of Finn. Thou art come to the land of youth, where sorrow and weariness and death shall never touch thee. This thou hast won by thy faithfulness and valor, and by the songs that thou hast made for the men of Erin, whereof the fame is come to us, for we have here indeed all things that are delightful and joyous, but poesy alone we had not. But now we have the chief poet of the race of men to live with us, immortal among immortals, and the fair and cloudless life that we lead here shall be praised in verses as fair, even as thou, Oisin, didst praise and adorn the short and toilsome and checkered life that men live in the world thou hast left forever. And Niam, my daughter, shall be thy bride, and thou shalt be in all things, even as myself, in the land of youth." Then the heart of Oisin was filled with glory and joy, and he turned to Niam and saw her eyes burn with love as she gazed upon him. And they were wedded the same day, and the joy they had in each other grew sweeter and deeper with every day that passed. All that Niam had promised her in her magic song in the wildwood, when first they met, seemed faint beside the splendor and beauty of the life in the land of youth. In the great palace they trod on silken carpets and ate off plates of gold. The marble walls and doorways were wrought with carved work, or hung with tapestries, where forest glades and still lakes and flying deer were done in colors of unfading glow. Sunshine bathed that palace always, and cool winds wandered through its dim corridors, and in its courts there played fountains of bright water, set about with flowers. When Oisin wished to ride, a steed of fiery but gentle temper bore him wherever he would through the pleasant land. When he longed to hear music, there came upon his thought, as though borne on the wind, crystal notes such as no hand ever struck from the strings of any harp on earth. But Oisin's hand now never touched the harp, and the desire of singing and of making poetry never waked in him. For no one thing seemed so much better than the rest, where all perfection bloomed and glowed around him, as to make him long to praise it and to set it apart. When 7 days had passed, he said to Niam, "I would fain go a-hunting." Niam said, "So be it, dear love. tomorrow we shall take order for that. Oisin lay long awake that night, thinking of the sound of Finn's hunting horn, and of the smell of green boughs when they kindled them to roast the deer flesh in Fian ovens in the wildwood. So, next day, Oisin and Niam fared forth on horseback, with their company of knights and maidens, and dogs leaping and barking with eagerness for the chase. Anon they came to the forest, and the hunters with the hounds made a wide circuit on this side and on that, till at last the loud clamor of the hounds told that a stag was on foot, and Oisin saw them streaming down an open glen, the stag with its great antlers laid back and flying like the wind. So he shouted the Fian hunting cry and rode furiously on their track. All day long they chased the stag through the echoing forest, and the fairy steed bore him unfaltering over rough ground and smooth, till at last, as darkness began to fall, the quarry was pulled down, and Oisin cut its throat with his hunting knife. Long it seemed to him since he had felt glad and weary as he felt now, and since the woodland air with odors of pine and mint and wild garlic had tasted so sweet in its mouth. And truly it was longer than he knew. But when he bade make ready for the wood oven for their meal and build a bothy of boughs for their repose, Niam led him 7 steps apart and 7 to the left hand, and yet 7 back to the place where they had killed the deer, and lo, there rose before him a stately dune with litten windows and smoke drifting above its roof. When they entered, there was a table spread for a great company, and cooks and serving men busy with a wide hearth where roast and boiled meats of every sort were being prepared. Casks of Greek wine stood open around the walls, and cups of gold were on the board. So they all ate and drank their sufficiency, and all night Oisin and Niam slept on a bed softer than swan's down, in a chamber no less fair than that which they had in the city in the land of youth. Next day, at the first light of dawn, they were on foot, and soon again the forest rang to the baying of hounds and the music of the hunting horn. Oisin's steed bore him all day, tireless and swift as before, and again the quarry fell at night's approach, and again a palace rose in the wilderness for their night's entertainment, and all things in it even more abundant and more sumptuous than before. And so for 7 days they fared in the forest, and 7 stags were slain. Then Oisin grew wearied of hunting, and as he plunged his sharp black hunting knife into the throat of the last stag, he thought of the sword of magic temper that hung idly by his side in the city of youth, or rested from its golden nail in his bedchamber. And he said to Niam, "Has thy father never a foe to tame, never a wrong to avenge? Surely the peasant is no man whose hand forgets the plough, nor the warrior whose hand forgets the sword hilt." Niam looked on him strangely for a while, and as if she did not understand his words, or sought some meaning in them which yet she feared to find. But at last she said, "If deeds of arms be thy desire, Oisin, thou shalt have thy sufficiency ere long." And so they rode home, and slept that night in the palace of the city of youth. At daybreak on the following morn, Niam roused Oisin, and she buckled on him his golden-hilted sword and his corslet of blue steel inlaid with gold. Then he put on his head a steel and gold helmet with dragon crest, and slung on his back a shield of bronze, wrought all over with cunning hammerwork of serpentine lines that swelled and sank upon the surface, and coiled in mazy knots, or flowed in long sweeping curves like waves of the sea when they gather might and volume for their leap upon the sounding shore. In the glimmering dawn, through the empty streets of the fair city, they rode forth alone and took their way through fields of corn and by apple orchards where red fruit hung down to their hands. But by noontide, their way began to mount upward among blue hills that they had marked from the city walls toward the west, and of man's husbandry they saw no more, but tall, red-stemmed pine trees bordered the way on either side, and silence and loneliness increased. At length they reached a broad tableland deep in the heart of the mountains, where nothing grew but long, coarse grass, drooping by pools of black and motionless water, and where great boulders, bleached white or stained with slimy lichens of livid red, lay scattered far and wide about the plain. Against the sky the mountain line now showed like a threat of bared and angry teeth, and as they rode toward it, Oisin perceived a huge fortress lying in the throat of a wide glen or mountain pass. White as death was the stone of which it was built, save where it was streaked with black or green from the foulness of wet mosses that clung to its cornices and battlements, and none seemed stirring about the place, nor did any banner blow from its towers. Then said Niam, "This, O Oisin, is the doing of the great Fover of the mighty blows. In it he keeps prisoner a princess of the fairy folk, whom he would fain to make his bride, but he may not do so, nor may she escape, until Fover has met in battle a champion who will undertake her cause. Approach then to the gate, if thou art fain to undertake this adventure, and blow the horn which hangs thereby, and then look to thy weapons, for soon indeed will the battle be broken upon thee." Then Oisin rode to the gate, and thrice he blew on the great horn which hung by it, and the clangor of it groaned drearily back from the cliffs that overhung the glen. Not thus indeed sounded the Dord of Finn, as its call blew lust of fighting and scorn of death into the hearts of the Fianna amid the stress of battle. At the third blast the rusty gates opened, grinding on their hinges, and Oisin rode into a wide courtyard, where servitors of evil aspect took his horse and Niam's, and led them into the hall of Fover. Dark it was and low, with mouldering arras on its walls, and foul and withered rushes upon the floor, where dogs gnawed the bones thrown to them at the last meal, and spilt ale and hacked fragments of flesh littered the bare oaken table. And here rose languidly to greet them a maiden bound with 7 chains, to whom Niam spoke lovingly, saying that her champion was come, and that her long captivity should end. And the maiden looked upon Oisin, whose proud bearing and jeweled armor made the mean place seem meaner still, and a light of hope and of joy seemed to glimmer upon her brow. So she gave them refreshment as she could, and afterwards they betook them once more into the courtyard, where the place of battle was set. Here, on the farther side, stood a huge man clad in rusty armor, who when he saw Oisin rushed upon him, silent and furious, and swinging a great battle-axe in his hand. But doubt and languor weighed upon Oisin's heart, and it seemed to him as he were in an evil dream, which he knew was but a dream, and would be less than nothing when the hour of awakening should come. Yet he raised his shield and gripped the fairy sword, striving to shout the Fian battle cry as he closed with Fover. But soon a heavy blow smote him to the ground, and his armor clanged harshly on the stones. Then a cloud seemed to pass from his spirit, and he leaped to his feet quicker than an arrow flies from the string, and thrusting fiercely at the giant, his sword point gashed the underside of Fover's arm when it was raised to strike, and Oisin saw his enemy's blood. Then the fight raged hither and thither about the wide courtyard, with trampling of feet and clash of steel and ringing of armor and shouts of onset as the heroes closed. Oisin, agile as a wild stag, evading the sweep of the mighty axe and rushing in with flickering blade at every unguarded moment, his whole soul bent on one fierce thought, to drive his point into some gap at shoulder or neck in Fover's coat of mail. At length, when both were weary and wounded men, with hacked and battered armor, Oisin's blade cut the thong of Fover's headpiece, and it fell clattering to the ground. Another blow laid the giant prostrate, and Oisin leaned, dizzy and panting, upon his sword, while Fover's serving men took off their master in a litter, and Niam came to aid her lord. Then Oisin stripped off his armor in the great hall, and Niam tended to his wounds, healing them with magic herbs and murmured incantations, and they saw that one of the 7 rusty chains that had bound the princess hung loose from its iron staple in the wall. All night long Oisin lay in deep and healing slumber, and next day he arose whole and strong, and hot to renew the fray. And the giant was likewise healed, and his might and fierceness returned to him. So they fought till they were breathless and weary, and then to it again and again, till in the end Oisin drove his sword to the hilt into the giant's shoulder where it joins the collarbone, and he fell a swoon, and was borne away as before. And another chain of the 7 fell from the girdle of the captive maiden. Thus, for 7 days went on the combat, and Oisin had 7 nights of healing and rest, with the tenderness and beauty of Niam about his couch. And on the 7th day the maiden was free, and her folk brought her away rejoicing, with banners and with music that made a brightness for a while in that forlorn and evil place. But Oisin's heart was high with pride and victory, and a longing uprose in his heart with a rush like a springtide for the days when some great deed had been done among the Fianna. And the victors were hailed and lauded by the home folk in the Dune of Allen, men and women leaving their toil or their pleasure to crowd round the heroes, and to question again and again, and to learn each thing that had passed, and the bards noting all to weave it into a glorious tale for after days. And more than all, the smile and the look of Finn as he learned how his children had borne themselves in the face of death. And so Oisin said to Niam, "Let me, for a short while, return to the land of Erin, that I may see there my friends and kin, and tell them of the glory and joy that are mine in the land of youth." But Niam wept and laid her white arms around his neck, entreating him to think no more of the sad world where all men live and move under a canopy of death, and where summer is slain by winter, and youth by old age, and where love itself, if it die not by falsehood and wrong, perishes many a time of too complete a joy. But Oisin said, "The world of men compared with thy world is like this dreary waste compared with the city of thy father. Yet in that city, Niam, none is better or worse than another, and I hunger to tell my tale to ignorant and feeble folk that my words can move, as words of mine have done of old, to wonder and delight. Then I shall return to thee, Niam, into thy fair and blissful land, and having brought over to mortal men a tale that never man has told before, I shall be happy and at peace forever in the land of youth." So they fared back to the Golden City, and next day Niam brought to Oisin the white steed that had borne them from Erin, and bade him farewell. "This our steed," she said, "will carry thee across the sea to the land where I found thee, and whithersoever thou wilt, and what folk are there thou shalt see, and what tale thou hast to tell can be told. But never for even a moment must thou alight from his back, for if thy foot once again touch the soil of the earth, thou shalt never win to me into the land of youth again. And sorely do I fear some evil chance. Was not the love of Niam of the head of gold enough to fill a mortal's heart? But if thou must go, then go, and blessing and victory be thine." Then Oisin held her long in his arms and kissed her, and vowed to make no long stay, and never to alight from the fairy steed. And then he shook the golden reins, and the horse threw its head aloft and snorted and bore him away in a pace like that of flowing water for speed and smoothness. Anon they came to the margin of the blue sea, and still the white steed galloped on, brushing the crests of the waves into glittering spray. The sun glared upon the sea, and Oisin's head swam with the heat and motion, and in mist and dreams he rode where no day was, nor night, nor any thought of time, until at last his horse's hoofs plowed through wet yellow sands, and he saw black rocks rising up at each side of a little bay, and inland were fields green or brown, and white cottages thatched with reeds, and men and women, toil-worn and clad in earth-colored garments, went to and fro about their tasks, or stopped gazing at the rider in his crimson cloak and at the golden trappings of his horse. But among the cottages was a small house of stone, such as Oisin had never seen in the land of Erin. Stone was its roof as well as the walls, very steep and high, and nearby from a rude frame of timber there hung a bell of bronze. Into this house there passed one whom, from his shaven crown, Oisin guessed to be a druid, and behind him 2 lads in white apparel. The druid, having seen the horseman, turned his eyes again to the ground and passed on, regarding him not, and the lads did likewise. And Oisin rode on, eager to reach the dune upon the hill of Allen, and to see the faces of his kin and friends. At length, coming from the forest path into the great clearing where the hill of Allen was wont to rise broad and green, with its rampart enclosing many white-walled dwellings, and the great hall towering high in the midst, he saw but grassy mounds overgrown with rank weeds and wind bushes, and among them pastured a peasant's kine. Then a strange horror fell upon him, and he thought some enchantment from the land of faery held his eyes and mocked him with false visions. He threw his arms abroad and shouted the names of Finn and Oscar, but none replied. And he thought that perchance the hounds might hear him, and he cried upon Bran and Skulong, and strained his ears that they might catch the faintest rustle or whisper of the world from the sight of which his eyes were holden. But he heard only the sigh of the wind and the winds. Then he rode in terror from that place, setting his face toward the eastern sea, for he meant to traverse Ireland from side to side and end to end, and search for some escape from his enchantment. But when he came near to the eastern sea, and was now in the place which was called the Valley of the Thrushes, he saw in a field upon the hillside a crowd of men striving to roll aside a great boulder from their tilled land, and an overseer directing them. Toward them he rode, meaning to ask them concerning Finn and the Fianna. As he came near, they all stopped their work to gaze upon him, for to them he appeared like a messenger of the fairy folk, or an angel from heaven. Taller and mightier he was than the menfolk they knew, with sword blue eyes and brown ruddy cheeks, in his mouth, as it were, a shower of pearls, and bright hair clustered beneath the rim of his helmet. And as Oisin looked upon their puny forms, marred by toil and care, and at the stone which they feebly strove to heave from its bed, he was filled with pity, and thought to himself, "Not such were even the churls of Erin when I left them for the land of youth," and he stooped in his saddle to help them. His hand he set to the boulder, and with a mighty heave he lifted it from where it lay and set it rolling down the hill. And the men raised a shout of wonder and applause, but their shouting changed in a moment into cries of terror and dismay, and they fled, jostling and overthrowing each other to escape from the place of fear, for a marvel horrible to see had taken place. For Oisin's saddle girth had burst as he heaved the stone, and he fell headlong into the ground. In an instant the white steed had vanished from their eyes like a wreath of mist, and that which rose, feeble and staggering from the ground, was no youthful warrior, but a man stricken with extreme old age, white-bearded and withered, who stretched out groping hands and moaned with feeble and bitter cries. And his crimson cloak and yellow silken tunic were now but coarse homespun stuff tied with a hempen girdle, and the gold-hilted sword was a rough oaken staff, such as a beggar carries who wanders roads from farmer's house to house. When the people saw that the doom that had been wrought was not for them, they returned, and found the old man prone on the ground with his face hidden in his arms. So they lifted him up, and asked who he was and what had befallen him. Oisin gazed round to them with dim eyes, and at last he said, "I was Oisin, the son of Finn, and I pray ye tell me where he now dwells. For his dune on the hill of Allen is now a desolation, and I have neither seen him nor heard his hunting horn from the western to the eastern sea." Then the men gazed strangely on each other and on Oisin, and the overseer asked, "Of what Finn dost thou speak? For there be many of that name in Erin." Oisin said, "Surely a Finn mac Cool mac Trenmore, captain of the Fianna of Erin." Then the overseer said, "Thou art daft, old man, and thou hast made us daft to take thee for a youth as we did a while agone. But we at least have now our wits again, and we know that Finn son of Cool and all his generation have been dead these 300 years. In the battle of Gora fell Oscar, son of Oisin, and Finn at the battle of Bria, as the historians tell us, and the lades of Oisin, whose death no man knows the manner of, are sung by our harpers at great men's feasts. But now the Tolkien, Patrick, has come into Ireland and has preached to us the one God and Christ his Son, by whose might these old days and ways are done away with, and Finn and his Fianna, with their feasting and hunting and songs of war and of love, have no such reverence among us as the monks and virgins of holy Patrick, and the psalms and prayers that go up daily to cleanse us from sin and to save us from the fire of judgment." But Oisin replied, half hearing and still less comprehending what was said to him, "If thy God have slain Finn and Oscar, I would say that God is a strong man." Then they all cried out upon him, and some picked up stones, but the overseer bade them let him be until the Tolkien had spoken with them, until he should order what was to be done. So they brought him to Patrick, who entreated him gently and hospitably, and to Patrick he told the story of all that had befallen him. But Patrick bade his scribes write all carefully down, that the memory of the heroes whom Oisin had known, and of the joyous and free life they had led in the woods and glens and wild places of Erin, should never be forgotten among men. And Oisin, during the short span of life that yet remained to him, told to Patrick many tales of the Fianna and their deeds, but of the 300 years that he had spent with Niam in the land of youth he rarely spoke, for they seemed to him as but a vision or a dream of the night, set between a sunny day and a rainy day. This concludes The Tales of Finn and Oisin by T.W. Rolleston, with an illustration by Warren Chappell. These tales were read for you from the 1955 edition of the Collier Junior Classics, Volume 4, Hero Tales. We will be back soon with more readings. Until then, stay safe and stay healthy.